Diet, exercise, friends, home.
Risk-based tax score.
Care management.
Hire Maryland Stebbins.
What was that last
Hire Maryland Stebbins.
Was that John? Yes. He did it.
I'll go with diet, exercise, aspirin, and vacations. Eliminate stress.
Language access, understandable language. Yes.
Patient education around diet and exercise.
Proactive patient education, proactive identification and outreach to patients.
Proactive care management.
Comprehensive health education, peer support.
Fruits and vegetables.
I'm torn between physical activity, nutrition education, and also comprehensive education management.
Team-based care model through comprehensive education management.
All of the above.
Engaging family units in prevention.
Reduce salt in all processed foods by 25%.
So we have to go all the way at the end here. I would just say, because of my background, partnership with pre-hospital providers.
Provider support and education.
Could you say that again?
Provider support and education.
I agree with everything, but I'm gonna go with something that hasn't been said, which is a digital patient.
Digital patient.
Oh, one? You wanna do one? Just do it.
Cardiovascular risk calculator.
Reverse the effects of aging.
I have solved the problem.
Health information exchange.
I'll go with the poly pill.
Now that I understand what being
Mandate take
I
that.
think being a strong advocate and agency for your own healthcare is very important.
Nice job, everybody. That was really interesting. We were able to capture a lot of that on our video.
Yeah, yes, it's very useful to know what's in your head. You sometimes hear what's in our head, but really important that we get this kind of feedback, so thank you. So I'm gonna have the privilege of introducing our speakers today, they're two distinguished individuals one who you know very well because she's kind of a big part of Right Care, including in our planning in the past. Dr. Regina Rayo is a cardiologist and who is the chief of cardiology at UCSF, trained in Mass General, and has a lot of accolades to her name. But one of the things I'm interested in hearing about is that she created a program called Hipsters, and she'll hopefully give us a chance to hear more about it. And then joining her, of course, is Marilyn Stebbins, who is a professor, also at the clinical the clinical pharmacy and the vice chair of clinical innovation and pharmacy at the University of California, San Francisco as well. And again, I don't have to go beyond that, but you all know Marilyn. And we're going to hear about team-based hypertension management, the new face of interventional cardiology, and then we'll have a chance to ask questions and really dig as deep as we can to identify how some of the recommendations that you made might actually interface with the new interventional cardiology things we're going to hear about today. So then, take it away, please.
Thank you, Dr. Rao, for being here.
Hi everyone, can everybody hear me? I tend not to project that well, so let me know if you can't. Thanks so much, Marilyn, for inviting me to this amazing location. I really enjoyed the drive here. We're talking about 20 degrees warmer than in San Francisco. It has sunflowers and a river. It's absolutely incredible, and to be amongst such an august group of people who've been thinking about cardiovascular risk reduction for a long time. So I come very humbly speaking to share my experience as an academic cardiologist. Title of our talk is Intervention Hypertension, the New Frontier for Interventional Cardiology. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how my journey with Maryland began, and kind of what we see as some new frontiers. I think this is a very multi-pronged approach, obviously, and not a one-size-fits-all, so we'll just kind of provide my perspective. So that's our clinic at UCSF. We see about 22,000 visits per year. Very hard to get to, right by the Giant Stadium. Terrible traffic and parking, and that's one of the biggest challenges we face for our patients. And we're really known as a tertiary care center, so what business do we have really thinking about hypertension, which is a front lines condition that everybody struggles with in their community and in their practice. So we really came to this when we were thinking about access. So UCSF, as many people know, has this ivory tower reputation, impossible to get a transfer in, really hard to get your patient in. And we started looking at our cardiology practice and said, how can we change that? How can we make it easier for patients with, who need a valve replacement to come in? So we started looking at what are patients seeing us for, and it was somewhat surprising to find out that about 12 to 15% of all our new patient referrals were for hypertension. Most of them self-referrals, which we accept. And that seemed to be the lowest hanging fruit to try to think differently about how we can take care of these patients so we can get the complex, more typical UCSF type patients in the door. And in so doing, we actually kind of opened up this little can of worms about what are we doing with blood pressure control anyway, and what can an academic medical center provide for hypertension care. So that's sort of how we came to this. The hospital and people in cardiology were not that excited about me taking this on, I'll have to say. So this is actually, this is what our parking garage at UCSF looks like. And every single column on this particular floor says, please leave the key in the car and the window open on every single column. And I really hope that nobody ever follows that particular instruction in downtown San Francisco. And I hope they give their key to the valet. Every year you hear about somebody's car getting stolen, and I wonder if they are someone who listens too much to what they're told to do. So we didn't listen. We thought that there was something interesting to hypertension that we should look into, even in the context of our small practice in cardiology. And it's no surprise to anyone here, about half of our patients have a diagnosis of hypertension, and about 3/4 have either hypertension or a comorbid condition for which blood pressure management is essential. So diabetes, heart failure, you have blood pressure targets for all those conditions as well. And then hypertension management really takes time away from other things that we all ought to be doing. One of the barriers that cardiologists feel for hypertension control is there's an unclear chain of command. Who's owning that patient's blood pressure? Is it the primary care doctor? Do we send them back? Is it their nephrologist, their diabetes doctor, if they have an endocrinologist? Is it up to us? Should I schedule them back? Or sometimes we ask them, do you have an appointment with your PCP to follow up on your blood pressure? Sometimes they say yes, sometimes no. So that's kind of leaves this sort of frustrating nebulous zone where nobody really knows who's doing what. Lack of time affecting access for us to get other kinds of patients in. Really dashboard overload. I think if we get sent another email from health physicians or payers with lists of patients who need to be controlled but no resources to do it, that's very fatiguing for people. And honestly, as cardiologists who like to think fast and move fast, hypertension feels kind of slow. It's just not that much fun. We all like to watch games like this on TV or in real life. And we want things that move fast where we see action in place. And can we actually do that for hypertension? They don't generally come to us with a big globular dilated heart like this. Usually this is what you're trying to prevent is an end stage of hypertension, but you see patients and they're mostly normal, and this is a prevention problem. So very different from the established cardiovascular disease problems that we see. So as one of my mentors, Bill Grossman, who's a cardiologist at UCSF, has always said, minutes are myocardium, seconds are sarcomere, get moving. We actually think this way in cardiology, and this is part of what makes us hard to engage in hypertension efforts. We talk about door to balloon time. So does anyone know what this EKG represents? Yeah, an inferior ST elevation myocardial infarction happening with big tombstone ST elevations inferiorly. And we actually measure door to balloon time. Time the patient hits the door of the hospital, as many of you know, to the time they're up in the cardiac cath lab, getting a balloon inflated and getting an angioplasty, and it has to be less than 90 minutes. And that was actually given as a throwdown to cardiology. You have got to get there less than 90 minutes, and then it became a benchmark for all hospitals to actually report these numbers widely. And UCSF, despite being so behind and so hard to move in so many ways, we have a door to balloon time of 80 minutes. So I feel that if we can make that happen, we should be able to make hypertension happen. But we need to bring some of that same excitement and urgency to taking care of this problem without going overboard and scaring patients, but also taking it seriously, because if you don't treat hypertension, this is what could happen to you. So I think we need to be thinking about what is your door to balloon time and what is your door to blood pressure control time. And time to control is not really a metric that we really talk about much, but possibly could not only be good for patients, but engage providers in wanting to do a better job. Because I think a throwdown always is an exciting thing to have done when you're a physician. So this is from the American Medical Association, and I won't read all this, but really their step 2 says act rapidly. So that's a word that we haven't really heard much when we talk about blood pressure, act rapidly. But this is actually, I think, something potentially a powerful frame shift. So what did we learn? Before we think about all this great stuff we can do, we have to look at our own internal processes in our clinics and see what message we're communicating. So I was talking to Tim from UCSF School of Pharmacy as well, and we embedded students, who are now called learners, in our clinic, and these are first-year medical students straight out of college. The whole paradigm of 2 years of preclinical years and then 2 years of hitting the wards and seeing patients is pretty much upended now. Students want to be in the clinic from the get-go. They really don't have any skills and they really don't know anything. So they're pretty smart. They got into medical school at UCSF, so they've got to have something going for them. So we said, let's put them in a clinic and have them shadow the medical assistants, interdisciplinary education. If they can learn what an MA does, that's foundational for eventually being a doctor, but if you can't take vital signs, well, you have no business going into medicine. So we started having them shadow the MAs, and we gave them a little syllabus on how to do basic vitals and an EKG, and then every night after coming to our clinic, they would write a reflection, which is a little one-page paragraph, and I would read it at 11 o'clock at night. Most of it would be their own internal musings about being in a healthcare environment and all the things that were good and bad. But I started seeing some students writing about how we take blood pressure in our clinic, and it was pretty atrocious. So one student even commented that an MA took a blood pressure over a cable knit sweater in a cardiology clinic. And I really had to sit and digest that for a minute. What messages were we sending? It's absolutely awful, and it's shameful for me to stand up and have to share that with you all. But I think it sent a lot of messages. It sent, firstly, a message to that learner or that student that this isn't really that important, which is a very dangerous message for someone about to become a physician, and a terrible message to the patient that we really don't care. It doesn't really matter that much, and none of these techniques mean anything. We don't really care about your numbers. So very insidious. And I was somewhat pleased to learn that we're not alone in this. So this was an academic study, and these numbers were pretty atrocious. So as far as what can an academic center do, I think the first thing is train people to do it right. We are training a new cadre of clinicians, and we're doing it hardly. So in this academic center, not UCSF, somewhere else, only 2% of patients had a resting period in their clinic between the time they came in and the time their blood pressure was taken. 40% of the time someone was talking to them during the BP measurement. 41% of the time they took it over a clothed arm, and 75% of the time it wasn't even done at heart level. And this is how we train physicians. So the first thing we can do before we do anything else is at least look internally at how we train our providers. And I think that's probably our biggest intervention that we're going to be making in hypertension. That's going to disseminate. So we got to walk the walk before we can do anything else. And so how do we address this? Well, we didn't reinvent the wheel, which is pretty much the UCSF way, is got to innovate and come up with your own idea, but we actually just went to see what the American Medical Association and Johns Hopkins recommended, and swallowed that difficult pill of looking at another academic institution and trying to copy them. But they have some good stuff out there on the web. So we went to the AMA's website, and they have this great website called Steps Forward, which many of you have seen. And it has a lot of training material on how to train medical assistants. So we just did a bunch of fun projects with them. We had them do blood pressure in all kinds of different ways, and actually wrote fake prescriptions for them who diagnosed themselves as being hypertensive inappropriately based on inappropriate measurement technique. And then we started empowering the patient. So the other way we didn't reinvent the wheel is Bill physicians actually sent us some little posters to put in the rooms on how to do a blood pressure correctly. And most of the people at UCSF throw anything away that doesn't say UCSF on it if we didn't invent it ourselves. But I said, this is really good. Let's just put this up like we were told to do. And we did. And it's right above the patient's head. So when they're checking the blood pressure, the MA is actually seeing that, and the patients actually can look up at it and make sure that it's being done correctly. So they check the technique. So I think both embedding learners and empowering patients to make sure things are done correctly is huge. Everywhere you go at UCSF, there's a sign that says, it's okay to ask me if I washed my hands. All right, so it's actually okay to ask if they're doing your blood pressure correctly. I think we can learn a lot from the hand washing QI initiatives. So what's the role of the patient in all of this? Well, so we talked about quality control and feedback. There's a lot of people talking about patient empowerment here. I think owning your number, it's your blood pressure, not mine. So you need to know what it is and what it should be. I think where we haven't done well in cardiology and medicine in general is open communication about side effects. We shame patients a lot, and so we don't give them an avenue to be forthright with us about whether they're taking their meds and what they do and don't like about it. And then when their blood pressure's still high after taking a med, what do? We add another med, and then we add another one, and pretty soon they're on 5 drugs. But we don't really say, that didn't work for you, let's ditch it and try something else. And so there is something called an N of 1 trial, which is just a fancy word for try it out, and if it doesn't fit, try on something else. And I think that might also help us engage our patients and get their interest in being able to talk with us about side effects. So this is, I see someone from the AHA here. This is from the Go Red for Women campaign website of the AHA. Know your numbers. I think it's just a really powerful statement, and I hope that it really gets embraced widely. But really, patients ought to know what their blood pressure is and what their blood pressure goal is. And just as much as they know anything else about themselves, like where they keep their car insurance in their car, it's actually that important. So we need to. I'm actually thinking we should probably put this message out. Don't leave clinic unless you know what your blood pressure is. It's on all these after visit summaries, but I think we need to highlight that. So barriers for patients is pretty much, as we all know, asymptomatic condition, easily forgotten. The meds sometimes make you feel worse, not better. They don't have any ability to measure it at home. They don't feel like the doctors really care about it because we're not demonstrating that we care with the same kind of assiduous technique that we ought to be. It's a low priority item, often is what patients tell me when they come to their visits. It's really expensive to park and come to the doctor and take time off of work for an asymptomatic condition. And then they don't have surrogate measures of efficacy. So you don't have symptoms to follow, your state blood glucose. Somebody in the back said give everybody a home monitor. Most of our patients don't have one, even if they can afford it. And even if they can afford it, they don't know what to buy, and we don't really have a good spiel on what to tell them to get. So lots of problems with that. They don't see the results, the fruits of their labor. So what are some solutions? Well, it can't be just sending doctors dashboards of hundreds of patients that aren't at control. There's got to be a workflow solution, okay? It can't just fall on the shoulders of people doing after hours non-billable work. And so what is the role of the team? So a lot of people mentioned team-based care. So that's kind of how I got to know Marilyn, this paper came out in the American College of Cardiology, JACC journal, and really talking about the role of the clinical pharmacist in cardiovascular care and in cardiology clinics in particular. And really in terms of delivering patient-specific services, but also facility-specific services. So what are you doing with your EMR integration? How are you putting your preference list together? Who's going to be the steward of your formulary? Who's going to provide QI? And then what can you do at a policy level? And how can pharmacists play a role in this? So I think that's also going to be really critical for us moving forward. And this is something that we talk about a lot, I'm sure all of you talk about, is how can everybody work at the top of their training level, doing what they know how to do best. And this is gonna be even more important, as we all know, in light of the SPRINT trial, which was released last year. Over 9,000 patients randomized, non-diabetic patients randomized to intensive versus standard treatment, so less than 120 systolic versus less than 140. And the trial stopped early due to massive benefit, okay? In a very hard endpoint, as cardiologists think of. 27% lower composite endpoint, heart attack, stroke, acute coronary syndrome, heart failure, or death, and then 25% lower hazard of mortality. So this is another throwdown to our entire field in the middle of when we're trying to just get the basics correct, and then this trial comes along. And we've all kind of known, and people have felt that we should be doing intensive care in a lot of our patients, but this will be incorporated into guidelines for sure. And we need to be prepared for it. And all the more reason that we're gonna need a team, because it is really hard to sprint and it takes a really long time. So Marilyn and I have embarked on a pilot study where we are trying to actually define not only your JNC8 goal in our patients, but also a physician optimal goal tailored for your patient, many of which is less than 120. And it's very hard to do. And even in the SPRINT trial, they had a hard time doing it. Not all those patients got to less than 120. And then you gotta get there and not kill the patient or have them faint, pass out, throw up from your medications, and afford all this stuff. So this is a big throwdown that we need to be ready, and I think this is why we need to do
So
it.
is that Go Ducks?
Yeah, it does look like a Go Duck.
That's Go Ducks right there. Tracktown USA.
Same goal. So UCSF Hipster, this is a little project that we started. It's very small, but I hope to grow it, and I'm kind of interested to get everyone's feedback later on in the discussion part of this session. But Hipsters, if anyone, who knows what a hipster is?
All the young people.
All the young people. If you've been to San Francisco, it's someone who, well, I'm not going to define it, but why don't you come out and visit? And there's a bunch of them near our clinic. So, and in fact, there's a whole new, instead of a parking lot where our patients can park, they built a hipster fire pit where you could make s'mores and drink beer in the middle of the day, and wear interesting sunglasses and have a handlebar mustache. So that's pretty much what a hipster is in San Francisco. But what a hipster is for me is hypertension innovating personalized strategies for excellent results. And so it's my own kind of throwdown to those in our clinic to say, how can we do personalized medicine? I mean, it's enough about genomics and genetics, proteomics, and all of the other things we talk about when we talk about personalized medicine. But this is really personalized medicine. How can we tailor care for our patients, pick a goal for them, and work with them hand in hand to get them to where they need to be? And so high-touch care from a cardiology team, really intense patient engagement, and how can we engage our staff to get to these goals? So I think in order to do this, we're going to need lots of different strategies, and we have all kinds of patients and challenges. But I wanted to spend a moment talking about mobile health and digital health because I think we can't ignore it. And I put a quote up here from Eric Topol, who is a cardiologist down at Scripps, but also pretty well known as a digital health kind of guru these days. And he wrote a book last year, and this is what he said. We are embarking on a time when each individual will have all their own medical data and computing power to process it in the context of their own world. This will set up a tectonic or tectonic power shift, putting the individual at center stage. What have been dubbed the 6 most powerful words in the English language, the doctor will see you now, will no longer be true. And the title of his book is The Patient Will See You Now. So we can talk later about how you realize this vision in disparate patient populations, some of which don't have as much access to care as others. But I think this is coming, and we need to be ready for it. And actually, we need to embrace it, because the only way we can do this work is if the patient is helping us. So mobile health or mHealth, how is this going to help us? Closer monitoring. We can think about that faster time to control, the door to blood pressure control time. We can intervene more rapidly with side effects and have a very self-aware patient who understands their triggers. I just had a guy who was doing this. He was taking blood pressures at home and sent me the whole log, and they were all horrible. And there was one day when he was 110, in the middle of everything being 150, and he's a cardiac patient. And before we changed his meds around, we said, what happened that day? Why was that a good day for you? He said, oh, well, that was my birthday, and I spent time with my family and I wasn't working. And so we just spent some time saying, how can we make more days like your birthday? So at that time, we didn't really change his drugs, but he started doing yoga and exercising and spending more time with his family and less time at work. And he just messaged me saying that his pressures are much better and he has more days that are like his birthday. So I think patient self-awareness of their own life has been something that's huge. I don't feel that I'm very well prepared for this, honestly, from my training to do all the kind of motivational interviewing and lifestyle education as a cardiologist that I ought to be, and maybe I can learn from people who are in primary care who know more about this, but I think we're gonna have to train our fellows on how to do this better. This is way more convenient for patients and frees up the clinic, and it allows you to kind of experiment, and this is where the fun of medicine is. Try this out, see if it works, let me know. That's part of the joy of medicine, I think. But then when you start going out there and you look on the shelf at the Walgreens and you see how many different types of cuffs there are, and you start opening up the journals, and every day there's a new article about a texting intervention or this intervention, or give them the Omron or the Whitings or this cuff, it really gets pretty overwhelming. So I think Marilyn said, just do it. Is that what your quote was? So I think, yeah, just do it. I mean, try something, okay? Something is better than nothing, as long as we do no harm. And so what we did is we decided to try a pilot trial with a company that's literally blocks from our clinic in San Francisco, a startup company. And this is Vital Labs. We have Rebecca, Dr. Golias from Vital Labs, who's joined us here. And Marilyn's gonna spend a lot more time kind of talking about the pharmacist side of what it is to manage patients remotely. But we embarked upon a 120 patient pilot where we give patients a blood pressure cuff. We prescribe it for them, and we have someone come into the clinic and onboard the patient, give them the cuff, load an app on their phone. And let me just say here, while we're thinking about diversity, smartphone penetration is extraordinarily diverse, even in populations that can't afford a computer and that have many other limitations. So, and this has been shown time and again. So we have to figure out how to use smartphones, not just for the elite patients who have the fanciest, newest version of whatever, but really to reach out to everybody, okay? And I think that remains a big area of research. How do you engage patients across the entire socioeconomic spectrum using mHealth? So we onboard them in the clinic. We do a period of baselining, 12 blood pressures in your home environment, in your life, and they learn a lot about themselves during those measurements. That's about a week of measurements. And then pharmacist gives them a call and does a med reconciliation, checks in with them, and that's really when the work begins of thinking about what we're gonna do with their blood pressure control. Okay, and you'll see a lot more of this from Marilyn to come. So we're looking at JNC8 goals, how we're able to attain them, as well as these tailored, individualized goals, as well as patient engagement and staff and team productivity and happiness. And so far in preliminary data, and this is a very biased sample, this is not a randomized trial yet, we're preparing for next phase, which will be a randomized trial, but patients who've been on the app for more than 60 days are 82% controlled. So I have mixed feelings about this. This is a very biased sample of very engaged patients. A lot of them are engineers. We even have a pharmacist who's actually in our trial. So it's not really reflective of the general population. But I think you have to start somewhere, and we're gonna learn from this and try to make a very generalizable trial. And also these patients were patients who we were seeing in our clinic before, and I think we basically offloaded them and insourced their care to be asynchronous from doctor's visits and freed ourselves up to take care of patients who need more TLC in-house.
Were all of the patients out of control before they started?
That's correct, yeah. So these are all patients who were above their JNC8 goal, and 82% were within goal within 60 days, which is a little bit better than what we were doing, just generally speaking, in our general clinic, which was about 65%. So there's a lot of data. That's the problem with this stuff. There is so much data, it's getting overwhelming. You can see this is a typical, this is a patient who we enrolled, up, down, morning, evening, they're all over the place. Some days are really bad, other days are dangerously low. Then he kind of gets to a steady state. We have patients who take their blood pressure and then they wait 5 minutes and take it again, and they do everything properly, and the numbers are widely discrepant, with 20 points different. What do we do with this? These are new phenotypes, these are new buckets of phenotypes that we are seeing when we get all this data. And someone had mentioned evidence-based medicine. I don't think we have the evidence yet to know what all of this means, but I don't think we can run from it. We have to embrace it and try to understand it, and I think this is really where we hope to do some more research and sort of understanding these phenotypes better and looking at outcomes. There's multiple different types of phenotypes when you get that kind of data. So I'm nearing the end because I want to save a lot of time for Marilyn, but I'm going to talk about what we've done with this. So to prepare for Sprint, to prepare for the healthcare changes that have already come, we have hired a pharmacist in our clinic. We'll be starting in a month. She's going to focus on hypertension. We actually had an open job description for a nurse practitioner that was open for about a year, and the job description was to do part-time care, focusing on chronic disease management and asynchronous care, and help develop panels and things with our EMR. Nobody applied for that job. And it really shocked me in the beginning. I thought it sounded really innovative and cool, really like an interesting job. But I found out a lot of cardiology nurse practitioners who want to work at UCSF want to do the full spectrum of care. They want to see patients in clinic. They want to take care of all different kinds of patients. So we really started to think creatively. And then when I met Marilyn, this like little light bulb went off and said, wow, there's people out there who really get this stuff, who actually want to lean into it and understand it better, and that maybe we can find a pharmacist to do this work, and that's exactly where we've headed. So we were hoping that this person will work not only in creating workflows in Epic for all of this, but also really help us build our innovation lab so we can try things out on our patients and disseminate our knowledge academically. So app-based solutions, I think we have to have a full menu for our patients. This is not going to work for everybody. We need to have texting, lower tech. We need to have plain old phone calls. We need to do what Kaiser does, which is have patients come in and have a medical assistant engage and take their blood pressure and do management that way. My chart management, which is our online patient portal. So really a full menu, a holistic menu that you can figure out what fits your patient best at the buffet table. Okay, this is my last major slide, but I want to not gloss over the huge challenges that lie ahead in doing this kind of asynchronous mobile management. Too much data, metadata, microdata, all these little trends, big trends. What do we follow? I think that needs a lot of study. What do we do about all this masked hypertension and white coat hypertension? There's papers that have come out saying that they're not as benign as we used to think, but we're going to see more of it as we start measuring patients more in their home environments. How do we realistically do these N-of-1 trials and make that actionable? How do we achieve the sprint goals or any kind of intensive goal, whatever that might be? And what are there surrogate markers for end organ damage? We're not going to see patients with acute myocardial infarction and dilated cardiomyopathy. By that time, it's too late. So are there any other kind of surrogate markers we can use other than blood pressure to know what to make of all those different phenotypic buckets? How do we not hurt our patients? Orthostatic symptoms, syncope. How do we make this sustainable for practices? There's really no billing model presently for it. There is chronic care management codes that are very challenging to bill for. And I'd love to hear if people are already doing that. So what's the revenue model? And then for cardiologists, I'll just speak personally, how do we make this really fun? And I found that the more challenging it gets and the more we have to respond to the challenge, the more people have leaned into it and found this enjoyable. EMR integration is really the biggest thing. When you're starting to work with teams that are in and out of your institution, how do you talk to each other? And it's just really shameful that we haven't made more progress in this area. And then finally, disparities. We are UCSF, we are University of California, and we have to think about the entire spectrum of our patients and how do we use this technology and different strategies to reach out to different populations, particularly underserved populations, or possibly even leverage technology to reach out to them better than we were before. Working people who are moms with kids who are busy, who have other issues to tend to. So these are our challenges, and I welcome comments and feedback, and I'd like to hand it over to Marilyn. Thank you for having me.
Do we want to do questions, Patty, now, or are we going to wait? Do you want to show your dashboard?
I have two questions. So I understand your desire to disseminate this in an academic way after you develop it. How are you going to disseminate it to your own primary care physicians? Because it seems like that's a real important thing to do. And then the other is, we've heard several talks about hiding in plain sight. That is, there's a significant number of hypertensives that don't have the diagnoses, but yet have blood pressure measurements that clearly indicate that they have hypertension. How are you going to find those within your system and address those? So.
Great questions, thanks so much. So the first question is, how do we disseminate this internally and share with our primary care colleagues? So we've actually created a hypertension working group at UCSF, which has family medicine and primary care, and actually has all 3 sites represented. So UCSF is both our UCSF Health, as well as San Francisco General Hospital, which is a county hospital, safety net hospital, and the VA. And so we're all getting together. We have a shared box account, so we all dump in all of our patient education tools all into one place, our algorithms, and we have a meeting every month to talk about this. We have, part of this working group is also to work with the electronic medical record. So there's somebody in that group who's really engaged with our EMR. So I think getting to your second question, how do we find some of these hiding hypertensives? There's EMR solutions for that. So, I mean, you can bold everybody. You can, with all those meaningful use, I don't know if everybody who's on Epic sees it the same way we do, but there's a bunch of green dots. And if you haven't done all the things that meaningful use wants you to do, then you don't get like a runway of green dots. For some reason, that's particularly motivating for doctors. We're all pre-meds, and we wanted to get everything just right. If there's not a green dot there, people freak out. So you can gamify it. You can highlight it. It should be bolded. There should be ways that that's flagged. So I think that's one strategy to take on. Yeah.
That works for engaged patients, but if they're not coming in, and so you don't have
the
point of care, you don't see that. So how do you find the ones that are less engaged?
I think that's a great question. I think we need to figure that out. I mean, one way is with the platform that we're using. If they disengage, it pings you, and then it'll ping the doctor. The pharmacist will ping the doctor and say, what's going on with this patient. So you might be able to have a way that you reach out to patients, but you don't standardize it so you're reaching out to everybody. You reach out to those who need it. So I think that's where maybe technology can help us a little bit. I also think there are EMR solutions for that. And probably what we need is at least, I don't understand why everybody who's on Epic doesn't copy best practices. I remember when UCSF went on Epic, I said, well, I want to know what Kaiser and Duke do. Why don't you just show me what they do, and then we'll just pick from what they're doing. There was nothing to show. It's all siloed. And so all of these institutions are creating best practices. So part of this ought to be a call for us to share post-market adaptations we've made to our EHRs. Will be another solution.
Well, and that's the idea of this collaborative,
yeah,
right? The university is sharing those ideas on
absolutely.
How you get things done and control your population.
So I think we need to speak with a really loud voice on these issues and be really transparent about it.
And it needs to go beyond Epic, because
absolutely.
Right now Epic penetration is fine in hospitals, but it's not necessarily the same thing in the acute setting. And as you mentioned, in populations that have disparities that may not necessarily have those kind of linkages set up. So we need to figure those out as well.
I think so. I'm just honored to be part of this group, and I hope we can work together and start really creating, EHR roadmaps. So it could be defined for each individual EHR, but what's a roadmap for a practice that wants to do hypertension? What are the 10 best things that you need to do so here, what's your preference list look like? Put all your combo drugs at the top. Give the creatinine when you report the lisinopril dose, when you refill it. Put the blood pressure on when you're in your in-basket looking at a result. These are the kinds of, we could create a roadmap for how to do this right.
I appreciate you mentioning the healthcare team, including the pharmacists. You didn't mention community health workers. I think there's solid evidence indicating that adding community health workers to the team and reaching out to patients in the community, particularly those that have not been well controlled. Are you using those, or are you considering using those in your approach?
That's a great question. We haven't really had much exposure to community health workers at UCSF Health. I know that San Francisco General, a county hospital, has used community health workers, but no, I'd love to learn more about it. I think we should. We should be really open to looking at whatever works and whatever's right for each patient population. Yes.
Or even besides community, advocates, also workers from different fields of areas of job trades. like one that we work with is farm workers. Really hard when you were talking about how to get them there, how to, that part, farm workers, it's really hard for them to go to, they get fired if they miss work, even to go to the doctor.
Absolutely, and no, I think that we have to, use mobile health to reach out to people, not to limit it to an elite group of tech workers, for example. And what we've also learned is people who don't even speak English, we've been able to reach out to using digital health. Because they often have children or relatives who can communicate for them. So prior to really engaging with patients in our EHR or electronically, there was no communication between visits. Now it's pretty common that someone's daughter or son or niece or nephew can communicate as a surrogate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Awesome presentation.
So, I have to say, all of these questions cross my mind as I'm working this clinic. So I was lucky enough, this is how, when Rajni says N of one, and my theory is try something new, fail fast, pivot, and move on. And that's what we've done with this project with Vital Labs. Basically in December, I met with Rajni, I met with Vital Labs, and they said, well, we'd like a pharmacist. Literally within 2 weeks, the pharmacist was working on the team. So it can happen, these things can happen. And the pharmacist, for all you out there, was paid for. It wasn't given away for free, so the value was there. So what I'd like to do now is really kind of walk you through what I do in this program as a pharmacist and how I interface both with patients, providers, and my coaches that are on my team virtually. And I have to say I've done a lot of telephonic work with patients and a lot of in-person work with patients, and it is remarkable how engaged these patients are who I have never seen. And sometimes when I ask them when they're on campus, can we just meet so we can see each other? And they're always like, oh, you don't look like your picture. I'm like, of course I don't. I make sure of it. There's good pictures of that. So what I want to walk you through now is the platform. And the platform for what we're doing, again, is just simply a platform. This isn't a sales pitch. This is just how are we going to care for the masses in hypertension? This is one solution. So this is, what I'm going to show you is both the provider desktop that I use, as well as the patient's mobile app. So when we started this process, we had to onboard people. So we have a team that is embedded in the cardiology office, that when the physician decides that this patient is a good candidate for the study, they're onboarded. They're given a cuff. Everything is explained to them. They're taught how to do their home blood pressure, and this is done. And what we found is we were missing a lot of people because you have one person onboarding patients in a clinic and you have multiple providers seeing patients all day long, and we missed some really important opportunities. So we started remote onboarding. So patients we thought, will it work? Can we remotely onboard these people after they've left the clinic, they're at home? Can we get them to get the app on their telephone? Can we do all of this remotely? And the answer is yes. The majority of our onboarding now is actually remote. So you can see here what our population demographics look like. Again, we do have some diversity, not nearly as much as we would like. We don't represent our own city when you look at it. But one thing I will tell you, those people who tell me elderly patients won't use technology are so wrong. I have to say that my most engaged patients with technology are in their 80s. My least engaged are in their 40s. And when I look at it, I had a gentleman tell me on Friday, he said, Marilyn, I know you can send me messages through the app, but can you just text me? And I said, well, why? He said, because I'm not in my app all the time. I said, that's really interesting. He said, well, you know where I learned this? My granddaughters. He said, I sent them an email, I get a response in 3 months. I sent them a text message, and I get a response in 30 seconds. And I said, oh, so you've joined our generation of immediate gratification. And he said that that's the way it is. So Rajni's right. We have people out there that want low tech. They want just texting, messaging, and we have people that want the full-on app. So let me show you what this looks like. This is what I look at. I was on it this morning because I had a patient this weekend pinging me all weekend who wasn't mine. I was on call for someone else who had just started medication, and literally her blood pressure on 2.5 milligrams of lisinopril went to 90/40, and she fell down. And she was at 150/90. And she's got it, she wants to have surgery, and she has to get her blood pressure controlled to have surgery. So she started pinging. And the good news is, I'm sort of obsessive and I check my email all the time, and I got a ping in my email saying a patient has pinged you. So I looked at her message and I'm like, oh, we have a big problem. I never even had to get on the phone with her. I went into the dashboard, this isn't her, found her measurements, saw she plummeted, told her to stop immediately, don't take your nighttime medicine, let's see what happens, we don't want you falling. And I have a phone call scheduled with her at 4:30 this afternoon. So that's what the sort of the power of this. So if you look, this is a very busy dashboard, but on your home page, or actually this isn't your home page, this is your patient page, you have what you're treating, you have the meds they're trialing, you have their contact information, you have this overview screen that if you scroll down starts with their systolic, but then their diastolic and their heart rate. It's graphically represented in that you can you can ping 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, or you can pick dates and get all of your averages of what's going on. So you can really slice and dice the data very well. I'll show you another piece of this that I find incredibly important. It's really important to know how people feel about their therapy. Not how they feel about this type of visit, but how do they engage what we're doing to them and what we're asking them to do to themselves. And so this platform shoves out surveys to them. So we can ask them satisfaction with their treatment, we can ask them satisfaction with their providers, we can ask them adherence. When I see blood pressures go up, I send out a tracker. The tracker then sends them a survey using the risky scale for hypertension, looking at their med adherence. So there's just a huge amount of data in here. So as we move forward, so if we look at it, I can basically dissect this, but I can even get down further because I don't know about you, but looking at a bunch of dots doesn't always help. And one of the beauties of being in this project is we're building the airplane as we fly it. So many of the things, I have people that sit behind me and watch me do my work, and they're developers because they want to know how this helps me. And I tell them, this isn't working. I can't, this makes no sense. You can't see it here, but I need shading when they're under control. I need it to be shaded so the dots that are under the shading mean that I don't have to worry about them. And that's the beauty of this is we can do all of those things. But the other thing is if I hover over any circle, I get what their readings are. And we ask people to do their blood pressure. We send out trackers. It sends a message to them to take, and they pick the time of day they want to do it, but they do it the same time, morning and night. It sends them out a tracker. Then they are asked to do a blood pressure. They are asked to wait their 5 minutes, feet flat on the ground. They're instructed exactly how to do it. Take a blood pressure 1 minute later. So every reading has a double reading. And so you'll see that each circle actually represents 2 readings 1 minute apart. Gives you their heart rate, and if the patient has put a comment in, it gives you that. So I ask people when I meet with them the very first time over the phone, I need you to tell me what's going on. Be careful what you wish for. I get a lot of comments, and I also get a lot of OCD. Some of these things, I have people taking their blood pressure 25 times a day. And I'm like, okay, you can stop now. You're not being pinged. Oh, but it's so fascinating. So, I mean, it's some of the people, and then they're like, but it went up right now. And I'm like, stop it. Stop it. I don't know how to interpret it either. So, Rajni's exactly right. When I look at these blood pressures, and I think I can show you, look at the variability. The fact that we treat patients based off of a couple of in-office readings horrifies me. I mean, I just think this is amazing because people's blood pressure varies throughout the day. I have one guy always up. I look at it and he cracks me up. Road rage, and I'm like, stop taking your blood pressure while you're driving. And he does do that. So, you know, people have varying degrees of engagement with this, but it is really interesting because what do you do with these people that have a high blood pressure in the morning and a normal blood pressure in the afternoon? And what if every single visit they go to the doctor is in the afternoon? And we think that they're perfectly well controlled when in fact their average is terrible. And we see it all the time. Not just white coat, but masked hypertension. So I think when we use these, we have to be careful again, because then we have to interpret it. So the other thing we can do is, if you look on here where the arrow is, it says table. You can look at all of your blood pressures by year, 3 months, month, week, graphically, which everybody is a different type of learner, so some people like to look at things this way, so that's helpful. When I hit my home screen, so my home screen is where is my default. It tells me my priorities, what I've got going. I've got somebody who's ready. They've had their 12 onboarding blood pressures. It's time for me to give them a call. I also have people who are reporting things that I have a coach that peruses the dashboard and finds interesting comments from patients, and if there's things that are important. So again, using your workforce wisely. I can't look at all 70 of my patients every day and see what comments they're making. So the coaches do that, and then they forward things to me that look intriguing. I can then reach out to patients as well, ask them questions. So, you know, how are you feeling? Well, so they can respond within the app. The other thing that you can see here is I have a list of calls. One of the things that really annoyed me was I was having to do double work. So they would, the coaches would set up the appointment with me, then I'd have to go in my Outlook calendar. I couldn't put a patient name in because of PHI, so I put a study number in and it was wasting my time. So I said, I want to be able to schedule appointments in the app and then they populate into my Outlook calendar, so I'm not doing this work twice. So now I can set up calls with patients, and let me see if I can show you a call. So I can schedule a call with this patient. I give them 3 time slots or however many I want that fit my schedule, and what time, and then a quick message. And this is what shows in their app. When do you have time for a call regarding a review of your med list? Or you can put whatever comment. And then they just click on the one they want, comes back to me, it's in my calendar, and it shows up on my dashboard. So it makes it very helpful. Another way to look at my patients is panel management. So obviously none of us have 1 million hours in a day, and I'm only funded 20% on this project. So I want to be able to look at my panel and see who I need to pay attention to. Who's the most out of control. So anybody above 10 points above their systolic goal gets a red dot, and I can sort these by the color of the dots or their risk. I can sort them in multiple different ways by low risk, medium risk, high risk, based on the colors. And that's how I plan my workday. I'm looking at people typically that aren't under control. People who are,